So I've had a lot of questions. A couple people ask me about riding in sand. It seems like on these big adventure bikes, that's one of the most difficult things to learn how to do. If you're anything like me, watched a lot of YouTube videos, tried out all the techniques, and nothing seemed to quite work out too well. Went down a lot, was getting pitched off the bike a lot of bar slappers, and I almost got to the point where I thought these bikes couldn't actually ride in sand, at least at speed or comfortably. So ended up doing a lot of practice out here in the desert. We're down here in Yuma, Arizona. You can probably see the neighborhood right there where I live. And believe it or not, I can take some of these trails right to work, about 2 out of the 6 miles of my daily commute. So I've gotten a lot of practice in. A couple things that I've learned that isn't really covered in any of the YouTube videos or tutorials that I've found. So we'll start off with a bike first. First thing that I changed on the bike was going to a big block knobby. These are the Shinko 804 805s. So the thing about big block knobbies is you want to dampen down the bike and get it to settle out in the sand. And one of the things that the big block fronts do better than like something more street worthy or a 70-30 or 80-20 tire is that as the tire rolls over the sand goes into all these grooves and it kind of dampens out that steering inputs you'll get from the trails. So what do I mean by that? Well, a smoother tire, like I used to ride the 704, 705s, acts more like a sharp rudder in the sand. So you might think that's good, but that's one of the reasons why I was getting a lot of bar slappers and getting pitched off the bike. So we'll come back to that in a little bit when we start talking about rake and trail. The other thing that I did to the bike with going to the 804, 805s is that the back big blocks are set up like paddle tires. So it does slide a little bit sideways in the sand going through corners, which is fine. It suits my riding style. But one of the things that these paddle-like designs do is it gives you a lot of forward bite. So forward bite is good once you get up on top and floating on top of the sand. Makes starting off in the sand a little bit different. If you dump the clutch, then you're just going to dig right in and set it right on the skid plate. But we'll also cover that in a minute. The next thing that I did is put on a steering damper. So I wanted to dampen down those head shakes I was getting, the bar slappers. So this bike right now, it's a 2006. Didn't have any way to mount a steering dampener, so I got a linear steering dampener, ordered it, made my own brackets, bolted it up, and it made a huge difference. There's about 20 different clicks worth of settings. I found around the 7 to 8 clicks of damping. Actually works pretty good in the sand. If you go all the way down to the minimum setting, great for the street, very flickable. If you go all the way up to 15 clicks, it actually started causing another issue in the sand where the bike would just wander back and forth. Made it real hard to stay on the line that I wanted. So those are the two big things I did to this bike, is just some decent 50-50 tires and a steering dampener. So other than that, it's just a 2006 R1200 GS. It's got a lot of GSA parts on it over the years, and it actually turned it into a pretty decent sand machine. Alright, let's talk about rake and trail now. So rake and trail, when we're talking about steering inputs on the bike, you got to think of your front wheel kind of like a caster wheel on a shopping cart. So rake is the angle coming down at your fork tubes. With the GSAs, it's pretty easy to see that, which the ball joint and the ball joint's on top. But if you draw a line all the way down, and where it meets the sand, or where it meets the ground, just draw a little line there. Now trail is the distance between this line and the center of your contact patch. That's about right there. So we got roughly 3 inches of trail on this setup, just on pretty hard packed sand. Now that's going to change quite a bit when we go to the fluffier stuff, and I'll show you that as well. Now the reason why this is important is just like the shopping cart front tire, the bike's going to want to steer and self-center itself. Once we get into fluffier sand, we're going to see some different issues arise at the slower speed stuff. So let's go ahead and move the bike, find some fluffier stuff, and we'll move on to the next portion of the lesson. Alright, so remove locations, a little bit deeper sand, a little bit fluffier. We did have a rainstorm down here in Arizona not too long ago. It's a little bit more hard packed. But so here we were talking about rake and trail. I just got the front tire popped up on a piece of aluminum, and you can kind of still see the contact patch is right below the axle. Now watch what happens when we roll the bike forward and it goes into the sand. And I want you to keep paying attention to this forward edge right here. Watch it dig in and start moving sand around. So it's important to note here, even though the sand is still pretty firm, is that the contact patch, instead of being directly under the tire, it's now up here. Okay? So as you're doing slow speed stuff, if you look at your rake, it comes here, and the main contact patch, as you're pushing sand around, is much shorter than when it is on firm ground. So what does that do? Well, that makes the bike a lot twitchier. With this working as a caster wheel, it's going to try and self-center and pick the bike up, but as soon as you start hitting deeper sand and it starts pushing up and mounding up under the front tire, you're losing that caster wheel effect and the bike gets a lot twitchier. So that's where the big lugs on the front and the steering dampener start counteracting that twitchiness once you start losing your trail in the deeper sand. So that is steering and why the bikes like to pitch you off so bad. So next we need to talk about weight balance and body positioning. So with weight balance and body positioning, you're going to hear a lot of people talking about standing up, standing on the pegs, moving like a little bit back, a little bit forward. And what it really comes down to is how deep your front and your rear are digging into the sand. You want to keep the front light, you want to keep up on top of the sand and keep moving forward. So if that means you got to shift your body back when you feel that front end digging in, that's the easiest way to do it. What I don't like to do personally is start blipping the throttle. I want to keep the bike as stable and as smooth as possible, reduce the amount of input going into the pegs and into the bars for my body weight. So I'm flexing my legs quite a bit, I'm moving around quite a bit, and I'm feeling that front and rear tire. So what does that mean as far as body positioning? Let's take a look. A lot of people talking about sitting down on the bike, standing up on the bike, and when they do talk about standing on the bike, they're going to say to flex your knees a little bit, keep your shoulders loose, your elbows up. Now that may work on hard pack, but on sand you're going to have to try and keep the bike as smooth and as stable as possible and reduce the amount of weight that you're putting into the bike on the foot pegs. So as you're coming up and you get into the standing position, what I'll do is I'll lean back a little bit, not too far to where you're stretching all the way back, but just a little bit to feel that front end lighten up. Now once you're up here, if you're too far back and your arms are stretched, if you do hit a piece of deep sand where it jerks the front end, it's going to pull your body way out of position and the bike goes down. So how do you keep that from happening? Well, as you're up, just suck down just a little bit more. That gives you a little bit more elbow room, and now you got full throw your bars. So as long as you're hitting the deep sand, you feel the front end tucking in a little bit, just bring your body weight back a little bit, suck down a little bit, keep your arms loose, let that steering dampener work for you. And then as soon as you feel the front end coming up and out, you can start relaxing a little bit, taking some of the weight off your thighs, getting a little breather. Now if you do sit down, all the weight is always on the bike. So that's going to come into an issue when you're starting and stopping the bike. If you're like most riders or some riders where you're standing on the ground and you're just trying to move forward in the sand but you don't want to tip over, a lot of guys will just take it up to like 2,000 RPM, dump the clutch, and try and walk their way forward. It does work sometimes. Sometimes in the deeper sand, it's just going to dig the rear end right down into the sand. As soon as that rear end goes deep into the sand, your bike's trying to do two things. It's trying to move forward, gain forward traction, and climb up and out of the hole. So it's going to be a lot harder to get moving. So to get rid of that, or to try and help your bike out, instead of adding another 180 pounds of weight on the bike, trying to move forward, just put a foot down
with the clutch, get that rear tire moving a little bit, and as you gain forward momentum, maybe a little hop or two, and slowly get back up onto your pegs. That'll allow the bike to get moving forward using all of its forward traction to move the bike and the weight of the bike forward before you're slamming your body weight down onto the pegs and sinking it back down into the sand. So we'll do 2 clips. I'll show you just dumping the clutch right here, and then we'll walk it out and show you what that looks like.
Alright, so let's see what happened. The first time when we dumped the clutch at like 2,000-3,000 RPM, you should have seen the rear tire dig in pretty deep and kind of struggle to get moving forward. And that's what all these marks are right here. The second time when I set up, that's where the rear tire was. You see a lot less drama back here compared to the big rooster tail. And look how quick it came up on top of the sand. Came up on top of the sand within 6-8 inches. Back here, we were just chewing through the sand the whole way before I let off and rolled up on top. So this is all clutch dump, let off the clutch, pull it in, and then the rear tire came back up on the sand as soon as it was off throttle, stopped here, and then I did the method where I'm just dabbing, keeping most of my weight on the sand and not on the bike, and it just climbed up, right up and out. So right here, not too much drama, right up and on the sand, and we're off and moving. So the next lesson that we need to talk about is how to turn. Once we get up on top of the sand, we need to figure out how to turn. That's going to be low speed and higher speed riding. The goal of riding in the sand is to get up into your second and third gear range, and then if you do have to turn in second or third gear, it's going to take a little bit more effort. You just got to keep the bars straight. There's not going to be a whole lot of drama. If you are turning slower speed, there's going to be a lot of bar movement, turning the bars, getting the bike turned. And we're going to accomplish that one of 2 ways. So the first way is just getting back down into first gear, slowly turning the bar just a little bit. But unlike most off-road riding where they teach you how to counterbalance or counterlean the bike, you're going to want to keep that bike about as straight up and down as possible. So think back to that front end and it being a little caster wheel. If you take a shopping cart and you lean it off to the side, it immediately jerks to the side. Same thing is going to happen in slow speed turns in the sand if you lean the bike into the turn. The goal is just stability, so slow speed turning, we're just going to keep the bike as upright as possible. Now if you do get into the situation where your bike's front end digs into the sand and you feel it pulling itself in and snapping that bar over, just give it a little bit more throttle, it'll pop the front end right up and out. The goal is not to have to do that though. The goal is just to have a slow speed turn, smooth on the throttle, and not much drama. So let's find some smaller, slower speed turns, and then we'll give it a shot. Change the camera settings a little bit. Got you on the helmet cam today because it's a little windy. Let me change those settings around, and then we'll get moving.